Chapter 38. It was later than Gwendraeth James had expected when he finally arrived back at Maesybont police station after a long and frustrating drive in which he'd been delayed twice. It was now just before 10:45, and Harry Warden, wearing his off-duty clothes, was waiting for him in the entrance of the main building. "What do you think then, Chief?" Warden said, as Gwendraeth came into the overheated vestibule. "I don't think, Warden, I just am," Gwendraeth snapped. It wasn't his sergeant's fault that he had just driven over 450 miles, and he knew it. It was nothing to do with Harry Warden that the night was turning increasingly dangerous. That was just part of the job, even if it made him jumpy. But sometimes there was just something so unexcitable about Harry Warden that it irritated him. Tonight was one of those occasions. "Harding's been burning my ear as well," Warden said. "I know that, Warden," Gwendraeth said irritably. "I spoke to him on the mobile soon after I spoke to you. I explained to him about Simon Merriam. Told him there was no point in holding two people who confessed to the same crime. I also told him we would prepare him to let her go. Didn't like that, did he?" "No, he didn't. Where's her brother?" "Downstairs in the cells," Harry Warden said. "Do you want to see him?" Gwendraeth considered this on the way down. Driving through the darkening evening and into the night had given him time to sort out his priorities. "No," he said. "Now with all this going on, isn't time. He's charged, is he?" Harry Warden confirmed that Simon Merriam had been cautioned and that his sister had been released. "Where is she now?" Gwendraeth James asked. The vestibule was stuffy, and it also increased his feelings that he could do with a drink. But he was late. There wasn't time either. Harry Warden jerked his thumb towards the waiting room. "Pritchard or one of the boys will take her home when they got a moment." Gwendraeth was thinking about what the rest of the night might hold in store for them. "We ready then?" Harry Warden looked at him closely for a moment. "Think this is dangerous, Chief?" Gwendraeth had also been considering this aspect of the matter on the way down. They were dealing with a skilled adversary, one who'd been trained as a marksman and who was good at undercover operations. "We know he's armed, Warden, so we take no chances. What we don't know yet is how far he's involved in all this." "That name you gave him on the way down, Scrimshaw, where did that come from?" "It's a long story," Gwendraeth said. "I'll tell you on the way." So a few moments later, they both got back into Gwendraeth's car and headed towards the headquarters of Western Winds, the place where the latest and most disturbing phone call had come from. On the way there, Gwendraeth James told Harry Warden what he'd discovered in Yorkshire about his interview with Eleanor Welmacott, the mother of the man who now went by the name of David Young. Gwendraeth told him about how he'd recognized the illegitimate son of Wyndham Spencer James and Anne Davies' mother from his army photograph. He'd recognized him immediately and surmised that he was the one who'd stolen the Scrimshaw skeleton from Anne Davies' bungalow and who was possibly responsible for the death of Queenie Rogers. He didn't know how. Not yet. He didn't know how it all fitted, but he expected to find out soon. A blaze of light hit the gravel driveway. Lights burned in every room of the ground floor of the over-modernized Victorian building, emphasizing its unreal air, its combination of Victorian complications and modern steel brutalism. The vestibule at night was white, a minimalist nightmare in stark contrast to the ornate corbelled and castellated conglomeration of Victoriana that decorated the outside. It was as if Catherine Watts Wyndham Spencer James's secretary, who had telephoned the station just before Gwendraeth had arrived, was now overcompensating for her earlier reticence and was attempted to comfort herself as best she could with a lavish display of light. "I'm very sorry," she said, as Gwendraeth James and Harry Warden mounted the steps to meet her. She'd obviously been drinking. "I had no idea about anything like this." "Show us where it is," Gwendraeth said, as sympathetically as he could, given the circumstances. Without saying anything more, Catherine Watts led them through the modernised hallway of the building and into Wyndham Spencer James's office. Once there, she pushed a button above the fireplace to reveal the secret world of a detailed obsession. A sliding door moved back slowly to show a hidden room that seemed to be half studio, half love nest. There was a 4-poster bed in burnished steel that was flanked by a matching chest of drawers. On the walls, there were large mounted photographs of a tattooed woman in a series of graphic sexual poses, including one in which her legs were raised high in the air, and another in which she turned her face towards the camera, revealing a tattooed face that did not seem to be experiencing much pleasure. "It's her, isn't it? It's the dead woman." Gwendraeth James nodded. He didn't need to say anything. He'd recognized the unforgettable features of Queenie Rogers almost immediately. For a moment, the unavoidable, intimate details of the photographs supplanted the memory of the living woman. A thought struck him. What was it that someone had said during the interviews that night in the mansion kitchen, just after the murder had been discovered? That Queenie Rogers only slept with men she didn't like? Well, she'd certainly paid for it now. Martin James, David Young, and now Wyndham Spencer James, Harry Warden said, standing next to Gwendraeth and almost echoing his own thoughts. Who'd have thought it? "I should have told you what I suspected," Catherine Watts now said. Her contrition seemed genuine, Gwendraeth thought. "I thought he was seeing someone, of course," Catherine Watts continued. "But I had no idea who it was. He's my boss, after all, and I didn't think it was any of my business. I do have to tell you that despite everything, he was always the perfect gentleman with me." Gwendraeth cast an eye over the photographs once more. He couldn't help wondering how a perfect gentleman took pornographic photos of a tattooed woman in contorted poses. He didn't stay with the thought long. Now there were more important things to consider. "Tell me what happened tonight," he said. He was gentle as he could be, given the circumstances. "You don't think he killed her, do you?" Catherine Watts asked suddenly. "Tonight," Gwendraeth said, again as calmly as he could. He knew there was no time to waste. "It's all right if you take your time. Within reason." "You were working late," Catherine Watts began to explain. "There'd been a lot to do lately because Mr. James, was anxious to finalise the project. The one involving the wind farm on the hill above that beautiful house that used to belong to his ancestors. Anyway, we were working late, and when the phone call came, I recognised the voice. It was a flat, northern accent. He'd called before. There's not many of them round here sounding like that. He didn't say who he was, but he did say that he had to speak to Mr. James. In fact, he was adamant." "David Young," Harry Warden said, looking to Gwendraeth for confirmation. Gwendraeth nodded back at his sergeant, and then he said to Catherine Watts, "Do you have any idea what he wanted to talk to your boss about?" Catherine Watts shook her head. She dabbed at her face again with a handkerchief. Then she continued, "Not exactly. I did see Spencer, Mr. James, get quite agitated when they were talking. 'You're sure,' he said, just like that. 'This isn't a joke,' he said. 'Mr. James can be quite a serious person, you know. despite his charm. Then, when he'd finished, he turned to me suddenly and said, "I'm sorry, Catherine, something very urgent has come up. I've got to go out." "But it's late," I said. "Is everything all right?" "Perfectly all right, thank you, Catherine," he said. But I could tell it wasn't. He poured himself a glass of whiskey before he left. I took that as a bad sign. He is a drinker, I know that, but he's usually very careful when he drives. Anyway, I didn't know what came over me exactly, but I was worried about him, I suppose. I said, "It's about her, isn't it?" "About whom, Catherine?" he said. I could tell he was a little annoyed, but didn't care. "About that woman you've been seeing." He looked at me as if I'd done something terrible. I wasn't supposed to know anything, and if I did, then I was supposed to keep quiet. But I couldn't, not anymore. I was worried. I'd grown closer to him in a way since we'd been working together. I didn't want any harm to come to him, even if strictly it wasn't any of my business. "What makes you think harm could come to him?" Harry Warden said. Gwendraeth had to admit it was a good question. "He was late. He was flurried. He was drinking too much. He hadn't been himself for a week or more," Catherine Watts continued. "Of course, I didn't know what it was about. I couldn't, could I? It wasn't till after he'd gone I found all this. I couldn't know what it was, but I was upset after he'd gone. I was disturbed because he was troubled. So I went and did something I'd never done before. I went and looked in his private studio, where he sometimes stayed overnight. I went in, I saw the pictures on the walls. I recognized the dead woman from the pictures in the paper. I was shocked for a minute or two, I suppose. Then I decided to call you." "How long ago exactly was that?" Gwendraeth said. Catherine Watts looked down at the neat little heart-shaped watch she wore on her left wrist. "Just over half an hour ago." "Did he say where he's going?" "Not exactly, but on the way out he did ask me how close a car could get to Llyn Castle." "He did?" "My mother lives in the village. She bought a little cottage there last year, so he knew I would know that."
"And you told him?"
Gwendraeth James said. He was already moving towards the door. "Yes, I did," Catherine Watts admitted. She obviously wanted reassurance. "Did I do the right thing?"
"Yes, you did, miss. You did the best you could," Harry Warden said. And then he followed his superior out of the door. Gwendraeth James started the car and began to turn around in front of the headquarters of Western Winds. One by one, the lights in the building began to go off. "The Scrimshaw skeleton," Harry Warden said, as soon as they were on the move again. "You think David Young took it, don't you? You think he stole it from Anne Davies?" "I know he did."
Gwendraeth slowed as they went through the gateway and accelerated again as they reached the main road. After driving a little while, he took a turning to the left. "Where are we going, Chief?"
"Llyn Castle. It's obvious, isn't it?"
"I mean, this way." Gwendraeth changed into third gear and began to climb the hill as fast as he could.
"Saves time. This road twists up and behind the castle and drops down again right onto it."
"I took Anita there about a month ago for the pageant," Harry Warden said. "Only we went the long way round. Didn't know about this way."
"Used to cycle up here when I was a boy," Gwendraeth said. "Wouldn't like to try it now."
If he remembered correctly, there was a farm entrance with an old milk churn stand in a little while.
"And it's not a pageant, Warden. It's a son et lumiere."
"What's that then, Chief?"
"That's French for sound and light show, Warden," Gwendraeth said. "And I don't mean Australian Pink Floyd." "You can show your age without meaning to. Sometimes you can," Harry Warden said. "You're a bad fit for Generation X, if you don't mind my saying so." "I'm concentrating," Gwendraeth said as he drove.
He'd now passed the farm he'd been thinking about. The top of the hill couldn't be that far away. "So David Young called Wyndham Spencer James to a meeting using the skeleton as a pretext. That's what you're thinking, isn't it?" Harry Warden said. "Why didn't he just tell him he knew he was his natural father?" because then he might not have gone to the rendezvous. Why not? Gwendraeth reached the top of the hill, turned towards the left, and began the narrow, twisting descent down towards Slynn Castle. Because he might have guessed it was David Young who killed Queenie Rogers. You don't know that exactly. I know he had the opportunity. Who else was close enough to follow her to a tryst with Wyndham Spencer James, waylay her on the way back home, kill her, and bring back the body in the boot of the borrowed car? He did this because he hated Wyndham Spencer James and Plas Wern Las and all the other Jameses. That's why he shot at Martin James and Fionn Roberts. He probably could have killed them too if he wanted. He's an expert marksman, and that's not all. He's a careful, calculating man gone wrong, Warden. And you know as well as I do what he might be capable of. What's that, Chief? Anything. Harry Warden didn't deny what Gwendraeth was saying, but there was something else he wanted to know. But why would he hate them? He said, as Gwendraeth James abandoned caution and began to drive too fast down the steep and twisting road. Because he was excluded, Gwendraeth said. Because there was an inheritance and an accident of birth made sure none of it was his. Because whatever he did, he knew he could never belong with them, and that made him dangerous. You mean he's capable of another murder? You said it, Warden, Gwendraeth James said. He kept on driving. They came out of a narrow turning in the middle of the village. Gwendraeth James turned right and went past the huddle of whitewashed cottages that clung to the narrow strip of land before the hill rose steeply behind. There was a whisper of rain, but nothing heavy. Lights now shone in the windows of the small cottages, which were over-decorated with criss-cross lead panes. When he was a boy, no one had wanted these small, one-story farm workers' cottages. Now they were holiday homes or weekend places for chief executive officers who worked in Carmarthen. There was a parking place for several cars in front of the cottages, and farther right, a curtain wall that marked the limit of the castle grounds. Gwendraeth pulled in and stopped. In the middle of the wall, there was a metal entrance gate like a turnstile. And parked in front of that were two patrol cars with their lights turned off, as he'd ordered. Sergeant Gwendraeth Davies, a man of medium height, with skin drawn tightly across his head, sat in the first of these with two armed officers with padded flak jackets in the back. They're in now, Gwendraeth James said, with a nod of his head when Gwendraeth approached the open window of the patrol car. There's the cars. Farther up, parked in the shadow of the curtain wall, as if they were trying not to attract attention, Gwendraeth could make out the shape of Wyndham Spencer James's silver Jaguar and Marion Keynes's Volvo, which David Young had obviously taken. Gwendraeth climbed over the entrance gate, which was locked, and motioned for Harry Warden to follow him. A moment later, two officers from the second car, one with sideboards that were obviously more than regulation length, started work on the chain and padlock with a jemmy and bolt cutters. As they were doing this, a third patrol car arrived. Gwendraeth took no notice. He and Harry Warden proceeded on their way. Castle Llyn now loomed up in front of them, and a pale sliver of moon revealed itself behind the battlements. The castle was chunky rather than elegant, a way station of defence against the disturbed and warring Welsh. Gwendraeth knew enough about history to know that this place, towering above the nearby lake and estuary, was no architectural gem. Its squat towers and gatehouse sat on the landscape like the impositions they were meant to be. Defensive rather than romantic, the whole place still emanated an impression of brute force that was chilling. Gwendraeth went into the castle through the gatehouse, brushing aside memories of when his uncle Edward had first brought him there when he was about 10 years old. Since Edward had been in the force and had liked castles, it seemed ironic to Gwendraeth that the final act of the duplicate of a case that he'd been involved in 15 years ago was now being played out in one. Not that there was much time for irony. As he came to the grassy courtyard inside the massive bulk of the gatehouse, Gwendraeth could see movement somewhere to the left. He was tempted to shout, but he restrained himself. Then the sliver of moon that had provided some illumination was obscured by clouds, and he was back in the errant darkness with Harry Warden at his side. The noise had come from the right. There, an open staircase began at ground level and quite rapidly twisted itself into the stone mass of the tower. When Gwendraeth approached the bottom, followed by Harry Warden, he could hear footsteps above, and then the low murmuring of the voices began. He went up. The stone steps were steep and slippery, their surfaces worn by generations of feet. Gwendraeth went as quickly as he dared, though probably not as fast as Harry Warden, clambering up behind him, would have liked. When he emerged into the night air, the moon came out again, and he saw two figures standing on the narrow ledge in front of the battlements, silhouetted against the sky. The taller one was obviously Wyndham Spencer James, who, still only wearing a business suit despite the chill, seemed to be trying to wrest something away from the other, stockier figure, who was dressed in jeans and a combat jacket. Gwendraeth knew immediately what the object of contention was. Something that represented so much to at least two people. To Anne Davies, it was a symbol of her mother and Plas Wern Las. Wyndham Spencer James obviously felt similarly about it. David Young had obviously known this and had exploited it in order to bring his father to him. The battlements were higher than Gwendraeth had realized. Down below there was the glint of the lake that the castle was named after, though it was less of a lake than an ox bend in the river that held the water in its slow curving surface. The river itself, a shining grey ribbon in the moonlight, went serenely on its way towards the sea, as if mocking the struggle between the two men now beginning to rock to and fro on the narrow walkway in front of the battlements. Gwendraeth called out David Young's name to try and distract him, and it was precisely that moment that he found himself caught in the blinding glare of the crisscross lights. For a moment he was dazed, caught, a helpless animal transfixed in megawatts. It was all he could do to keep his eyes shielded from the glare, and he knew that Harry Warden was experiencing the same thing. Someone down below had switched on the searchlight from the song Et Lumière. Then the moment passed, and the searchlight swung away from them and traversed the battlements as if stalking their prey. The twin beams found the two men on a place where restoration work was being carried out. There was a gap in the battlements, and someone had erected a boarded scaffolding on which a pile of stones and a small cement mixer had been placed. It was here that the two, father and son, appearances notwithstanding, could be seen locked in their grim struggle. Wyndham Spencer James, despite being the taller of the two, was being driven inexorably towards the gap in the wall, towards a fall of several hundred feet and almost certain death. Towards the lake and the river which led to the sea, which had been the source of so much wealth to his ancestors. There was a shout, and Wyndham Spencer James managed to reverse positions for a moment, as if some manic inflow of strength was going to save him. Gwendraeth James felt a nudge in his back as Harry Warden pushed past him and moved swiftly towards the still struggling figures. It was a well-intentioned move, but it was doomed. Gwendraeth and his sergeant were forced to watch the final moments together. David Young now wrapped his arms around Wyndham Spencer James, and regardless of his own safety, brought them to the edge of the repaired battlements, and then over them. For a moment, the beams of the searchlights caught the two figures, frozen together in light, locked in an embrace that the son had chosen, but not the father. Then it was over. 300 feet below, there was a sickening thud, followed by a scurry of movement as the witnesses began to gather around the bodies.